For 5 years, I poured everything I had into helping my brother chase his dreams. Rent, bills, business ideas, you name it. I believed in him, trusted him, and honestly, I thought I was just being a good sister. Then, out of nowhere, a lawsuit lands on my doorstep. My own brother claimed I stole his future. Can you imagine that I froze, staring at the papers, wondering how it all went so wrong? What happened next? Well, that's where things get really messy. It started with a migraine, the kind that feels like a drum is pounding directly behind your eye. I hadn't even left work yet, and already my head was screaming. By the time I pulled into my driveway, it had evolved into this living, breathing thing that made every blink and breath feel like an assault. I sat in my car for a moment, letting the engine tick down, just trying to breathe in the silence of the garage. It was Friday night. I was 38, and I felt completely, utterly drained, not just tired, but a kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't touch. I just wanted a shower, a glass of water, and darkness. That's it. I stepped out, heels clicking on the concrete, the sound echoing too loudly in the quiet house. And the leather strap of my bag dug into my shoulder as I unlocked the door, and I walked into the mudroom. The place was silent, and it should have felt peaceful, but it didn't. Quiet can be comforting, sure, but sometimes it feels more like insulation, like it's keeping you trapped with your own thoughts. I dropped my keys on the granite island in the kitchen, where a pile of mail waited. Bills, flyers, a wedding invite from a cousin I barely remembered. I ignored all of it. I reached for the tap to fill a glass, trying to focus on something mundane. And then I heard it. 3 hard knocks on the front door. Not a neighbor, not a delivery. These knocks had authority, sharp, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. I froze mid-pour, the glass halfway to my lips. My stomach sank. It was 8:15. I wasn't expecting anyone, and instinctively, my body tightened. That primal alarm when you feel your personal space has been invaded. I set the glass down and walked carefully to the foyer, checking the peephole. A man stood there in a windbreaker, holding a large manila envelope. He looked bored, unremarkable, harmless but official. He introduced himself as Margaret, checked the address, and before I could react, slid the envelope through the door crack. "You've been served." And just like that, he walked away. I stared at the envelope, cold air rushing in through the door crack. My mind spun. Served me by my own brother. It felt like a jolt to the system, a betrayal of some fundamental law I didn't even know existed. I had never been sued. I followed every rule, every law, every tax form, every ethical guideline. I was the person who corrected cashiers if they gave me too much change. And now my brother claimed I'd defrauded him. I closed the door, my hands trembling slightly, and bent down to pick up the thick, heavy envelope. The return address was a law firm downtown I didn't recognize. I carried it to the island, my migraine fading, replaced by this cold, sinking dread. I tore it open. Plaintiff Lucas redacted, defendant Margaret redacted, nature of suit breach of fiduciary duty, misappropriation of estate assets, constructive fraud. My eyes landed on his name, and something snapped inside me. Lucas, my baby brother, the one whose rent I had paid just days ago. The words were there, laid out in black and white, accusing me of maliciously withholding opportunities, diverting funds meant for his ventures into my own pockets, demanding $450,000 in lost potential earnings and emotional distress. My brain refused to process it all at once. $450,000. Signed 2 days ago. 2 days ago, Lucas had texted me a photo of his fancy new workspace and thanked me for the transfer, unaware or uncaring that at the same moment, he was signing papers accusing me of fraud. A laugh escaped my throat. Incredulous, ragged. I wasn't sick. I wasn't dying. I was standing in my own kitchen in the house I had bought with years of hard work, reading these words from my brother, words that felt like daggers twisting in my chest. The betrayal was deeper than any migraine, sharper than any pain I could name. I sank onto a bar stool, the thick stack of papers sprawled before me, and read it again. Each sentence, each phrase, painted me as some tyrant hoarding the family wealth, starving the brilliant young entrepreneur I had nurtured of his rightful capital. Constructive fraud. I read the words aloud, tasting ash in my mouth. My first instinct, drilled into me since I was 9 when he scraped his knee or cried, was to call him, to fix it, to understand, to plead, to reach him. But then I saw the signature, that looping L, the jagged S. It was his. He had signed it. My thumb hovered over the phone anyway. I had to hear it from him. 3 rings and then voicemail. Normally he'd pick up on the second. This time, nothing. Then a text notification, hours old. He hadn't called me Margie in years. Claire, his partner, had told him no contact. The words burned. They weren't just legal, they were personal. They had stripped me of the last bridge I had to him. I paced the kitchen, letting the adrenaline finally override the shock. I looked at the lawsuit again, trying to focus on the cold, analytical part of myself, the part that makes you a good forensic accountant. The part that tells you that the emotional weight is one thing, but the facts are another. And the facts, Lucas, my brother, had filed against me, accusing me of fraud, claiming I had stolen from him, demanding $500,000, while simultaneously living off my support for 5 years. It was surreal, it was infuriating, and it was devastating. The room tilted, the migraine returned. But this time, it was almost welcome, because it distracted me from the betrayal, from the cold realization that the person I had loved, protected, and sacrificed for had turned against me with paperwork and legalese, and all I could do was sit there, staring at the envelope, trying to breathe, trying to think, trying to process that my own brother had just accused me of stealing his future. After the initial shock of the lawsuit, I kept thinking back over the last 5 years. The years I had devoted entirely to Lucas. It started right after the accident that took our parents. 1 minute, we were a normal family. The next, it was just me and him. I was already established in my career, living in a cramped city apartment, working long hours to climb the ladder. And he was a fragile 20-year-old thrown into grief, drifting through college without direction. The police came to my door that night, and in that instant, my life as an individual ended. I became his shield. I moved back to our hometown, taking over the house, handling the estate, paying off debts, and making sure Lucas could drop his semester without fear of failing. I held him while he cried, covered his therapy sessions, and absorbed every cost I could manage. For the first year, it was survival. I justified it because I was his only family left, because he needed me, because it was what parents would have done. But soon, Survival became a pattern. Each month, I was funding his rent, his health insurance, even giving him a stipend so he wouldn't have to take jobs he felt were beneath him. I bought into his dreams, every pivot, every idea. There was the app phase, then bespoke furniture, then day trading. I was there for all of it, each new venture adding to the invisible weight on my shoulders. My car grew old, my vacations evaporated, and my social life became non-existent. But I thought I was buying him time to heal and become the man he could be. I never considered that I might be buying the rope that would one day hang me. And then Claire entered the picture. She was polished, sharp, and attentive, every bit the opposite of me, with her sleek city smile and confidence that made my exhaustion and caution look like weakness. I remember the first dinner we had together. I was paying, naturally, trying to be hospitable, while she swirled her glass and made small talk. But there was an edge, something beneath the charm. She asked about the family trust, what it meant for Lucas, and made me realize in that instant that she wasn't just a girlfriend. She was someone who saw money, opportunity, leverage. I could see it in her eyes, the way she and Lucas exchanged glances. The kind of look that makes you feel you're watching a secret unfold that you're not supposed to see. It was subtle, but I noticed it, a chill creeping up my spine. From that point on, the dynamic changed. Where I had been the primary support system, the one funding every experiment, she started influencing him. Every time he came home, there was a suggestion about what he could do next, how much capital he could leverage, how much of it should come from me. And Lucas, always trusting, always wanting to please, listened. He didn't see that his new girlfriend was planting seeds, but I could. And I knew this was the turning point where the foundation I had built would start to crack. For 5 years, I'd given him everything I could manage. I remember the specifics, sometimes the $4,000 in tools for furniture that now rusted in a storage unit, the payments for high-end monitors, camera gear, software, servers, even health insurance. Each transfer was accompanied by a quiet internal dialogue. You're helping him heal. You're giving him a chance. You're investing in the future. And each time, my own account balance shrank. My sleep became lighter. My body and mind frayed. But I did it because he was my brother. The boy who had lost everything overnight. The boy I had promised to protect. And I kept believing that if I just kept giving, kept nurturing, he would eventually find his footing, start creating, and live the life he was meant to have. I would come home from long days at the firm, migraines throbbing behind my eyes, and somehow still write checks or make transfers for his rent, his living expenses, the occasional splurge that he didn't even ask for, but I knew he wanted. Every dollar felt like a vote of confidence in him. Every time he smiled at a new gadget or thanked me for a transfer, I felt like I was doing the right thing. Like this was what family meant. But behind the gratitude was an invisible debt slowly building, a burden I never mentioned, because I told myself it was temporary. I justified it with the thought that I was helping him, protecting him, keeping him alive emotionally, mentally, financially. But the cracks had been forming all along. I started noticing patterns in his spending, inconsistencies that made my stomach tighten. When I asked for receipts or updates, he waved them off, saying, "I trust you." And I did. I trusted him with my heart, my time, my money. That trust became the very thing that could be used against me. Every check, every transfer, every unrecorded moment of generosity was a thread in the tapestry he and Claire would later use to paint me as the villain. By the time I realized the full scope of what Claire was doing, smoothing Lucas's ears, planting ideas, convincing him that he deserved more, that I was withholding things had already shifted dangerously. Dinner conversations changed, financial requests escalated, and the sense of obligation I had instilled in him began to be weaponized. It was subtle at first, a comment about needing a nicer place, needing capital for a project, hints about what the estate could provide. Then, the pointed ones, references to the house, to my salary, to what they thought I had. The target wasn't just money, it was a narrative of our relationship, my role in his life, the trust I had placed in him. And here I was, looking back over those 5 years, seeing each sacrifice, each sleepless night, each dollar handed over with love and hope, and realizing that all of it had been reframed as evidence against me. The pattern was clear. Now I had been funding him, believing I was helping him recover from loss and pursue his dreams. While in reality, the combination of Claire's influence and Lucas's willingness to trust had set the stage for this lawsuit. It wasn't just financial, it was emotional manipulation, a careful and gradual reshaping of the bond I had so carefully nurtured. I can still see the moments that mattered, the early mornings covering tuition, the nights transferring funds for software or equipment, the long talks about what he could do with his life, and how I always tried to guide him gently without smothering him. I see the vacations I skipped, the nights I sat in the dark counting the money I had given away, wondering if I was making the right call. And I remember the fear, the pure, gut-wrenching fear that if I stopped, if I said no, he would collapse. That fear drove me to continue, to fund, to sacrifice, even as my own world became smaller and smaller. So when I finally saw the lawsuit with Lucas's name at the top and my name below, I understood everything in a flash. Every act of care, every sleepless night, every dollar given in good faith had been twisted into an accusation of theft. The betrayal cut deep, not just financially, but emotionally. And at the core of it was Claire, the catalyst, the influence that had steered him into seeing me as an obstacle, rather than the sister who had been his anchor. It was a 5-year story of devotion, manipulation, and the slow accumulation of debt and trust, ending in a single, devastating envelope on my kitchen counter. It didn't hit me all at once. The realization, the creeping horror of what was actually happening came in pieces. At first, I just felt that gnawing pit in my stomach, that unease I couldn't shake. I'd been funding Lucas for years. Yes. But the thought that he and Claire could be exploiting me never occurred, at least. Not fully. And then the patterns started to appear, subtle at first, like shadows on the edge of vision. Small inconsistencies in his requests. Timing that coincided too perfectly with Claire's bills or social media posts. Odd purchases that didn't match the stated business use. Slowly, the fog cleared, and I saw this wasn't just a boy making mistakes. This was calculated. They were taking advantage of my trust, my devotion, my fear of leaving him vulnerable. I remember sitting in my living room, the sunlight fading, the migraine from earlier replaced by a tense, burning focus. I pulled out the bank statements, the emails, the transfer confirmations, every note I had of the money I'd given him. It was like staring at the skeleton of our last 5 years, each line item a bone, a piece of proof of what I had done for him. But I wasn't just angry anymore. The shock had passed, replaced by that cold, analytical part of me that had made me a senior forensic accountant. I knew patterns. I could see discrepancies. I could trace a trail of funds from start to finish. And now I would do just that. Ralph became my partner in this quiet battle. I called him, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. He understood immediately, because he had always been cautious, always pragmatic, the grizzled attorney who had seen human nature at its most mercenary. He didn't flinch at the betrayal. He leaned in, focusing on the paperwork, on the facts. We sat together, mapping out the strategy, deciding what evidence mattered most and how we could present it to both counter the lawsuit and prove that the money had been misused. Ralph asked me for every transfer, every receipt, every note Lucas had sent requesting funds. By the end of that evening, our dining room table looked like a war room. Spreadsheets, folders, receipts, printouts stacked and annotated. I started following the money. Each transfer I had made to Lucas was classified, labeled, and cross-referenced. Business capital, equipment, rent, stipends. I looked for patterns. And then I began comparing the dates to his social media, his public posts, pictures he had shared. Each time a payment was made for a supposed business expense, there was a corresponding Instagram photo or Facebook post showing him and Claire indulging, buying luxury items, going out to clubs, dining, traveling. I could see it all. The coincidences were too precise to be accidental. The money was being siphoned for their lifestyle. It was methodical, almost audacious. And then came the contract. I had locked it in the drawer for years, barely thinking of it, an agreement from 4 years ago. A paper I had made him sign because the estate was dwindling and I couldn't just keep giving. It was a simple loan repayment and capital advance agreement. I pulled it out and read through it again. The ink slightly faded at the edges. My brother had requested a lump sum for server infrastructure, and I had made it clear this was a loan to be repaid with interest, contingent on business use. There was even a clause stating that if the funds were used for non-business expenses, the full principal became immediately due. He had signed it, and I had never mentioned it since, trusting that he would act in good faith. Ralph looked over my shoulder and grinned in that dry, rasping way of his. They never read the fine print. "Kid," he said, and he was right. Every detail I had meticulously recorded now became part of a puzzle. I traced transfers from the estate account to Lucas's personal account, noting amounts, dates, and intended purpose. I paired them with emails and messages where he had requested funds for specific business reasons. I cross-referenced these with public information photos of nights out, posts showing travel, purchases, luxury items that had nothing to do with any server or software or creative project. August 12th, $4,500 for graphic design software. August 14th, Instagram photo. Lucas and Claire at a VIP table in Miami. Bottle service tagged. October 3rd, $6,000 for a marketing campaign. October 5th, photo of a new French bulldog on Claire's feed. The pattern was undeniable. I started noticing the rhythm, the cycle of their spending, and it was always tied to Claire's debts or bills. I could almost see the puppet strings. Lucas was pliable, Claire was the one pulling, and it all started to click. This was never just about him being careless. It was about someone else's ambition, someone else feeding off his trust. Once I saw the pattern, the plan crystallized. I would not simply defend myself. I would counterattack with precision. I approached it like an audit, methodically building a case. Ralph and I sorted the evidence one folder for the loan agreement, the contract that made each transfer a loan, contingent on legitimate business use, another for the forensic accounting, tracking every penny spent from the estate, a third for social media, public records, and online evidence of misused funds. Each folder was a weapon, carefully constructed. I remember pacing the room that night, my mind racing with strategy. The first step, establish the loan agreement and demonstrate that Lucas had knowingly agreed to repayment terms. Step 2, show the misuse of funds, correlating transfers with non-business expenses. Step 3, uncover Claire's pattern of exploitation using social media posts, public records, and financial mismanagement to prove that she was orchestrating the diversion of funds. Step 4, prepare for mediation and court, ensuring that every piece of evidence was solid, verifiable, and unassailable. Each step was layered, deliberate, and meant to dismantle the narrative that I was a villain holding back assets. I stayed up late into the night, poring over spreadsheets, comparing invoices, transferring screenshots from social media into the folder for clarity, annotating each with dates and descriptions. I watched the timeline form in front of me, the overlapping cycles of fund requests and lifestyle expenditures. It was meticulous, almost obsessive, but necessary. Numbers don't lie, and here, the numbers were brutally honest. They painted a picture of exploitation, manipulation, and deception. The more I traced, the more I understood that the betrayal was not just emotional, it was structural, embedded in the financial interactions over years. Throughout this process, I felt a strange combination of anger, grief, and determination. I kept thinking of the years I had sacrificed, the nights I had lain awake, the money I had poured into a brother I believed in, and the cold fact that all of it had been used against me. And yet, I was also relieved in a way, because clarity brings power. The storm of emotion began to be replaced by purpose. I knew what had to be done, and I knew exactly how to do it. Ralph and I discussed every potential counterargument, every loophole they might try to exploit, every angle of attack. We anticipated their claims, their likely strategies, their weaknesses. By the end of the weekend, I had transformed from a sister in shock to a forensic accountant armed with a strategy, backed by evidence that could not be dismissed. The loan agreement, the audited spending, the documented social patterns, all combined into a narrative that told the truth that I had been generous, that I had acted in good faith, and that any misuse of funds was intentional, external, and orchestrated by Claire. It was almost cathartic, seeing the facts line up so neatly, knowing that I can now wield them. The betrayal had been personal, but the response would be precise, calculated, and utterly inescapable. And I felt, for the first time in weeks, that I was in control again, that I had a plan, and that justice could be served not just legally, but morally. It was a long, grueling process, but by the time I closed the folders that night, I knew we were ready. ready to face the lawsuit, ready to confront Lucas and Claire, ready to turn the tables and show that meticulous accounting, careful documentation, and cold logic could expose the truth behind 5 years of deception and betrayal. The mediation room was all glass and cold light, designed to look open and professional, but to me, it felt like an interrogation chamber. Lucas sat across the long oval table, slumped, eyes avoiding mine, suit ill-fitting and slightly rumpled. Claire, on the other hand, was every bit the picture of composure. Sharp white blazer, hair perfectly styled, makeup flawless. She leaned toward Lucas, whispering, guiding, directing, and I could almost feel the tension radiating off her. Their lawyer, Henderson, shuffled papers with a practiced air of superiority. Ralph and I arrived and took our seats. I kept my hands folded in my lap, calm, measured. I reminded myself composure is power, panic, anger, or pleading would only play into their narrative. And I had spent the last few days preparing for every possible move they could make, every angle of attack they might try to exploit. Henderson started, voice oily, rehearsed. We are here to discuss the misappropriation of the estate. My clients are prepared to drop the fraud charges if Ms. Redacted agrees to an immediate dispersal of the remaining assets calculated at $450,000 plus legal fees. He glanced at Lucas as if waiting for a nod. I didn't flinch. I met his gaze steadily. Ralph, beside me, remained quiet, doodling idly, waiting for the right moment. And then he leaned back, letting the first wave pass. There are no remaining assets, Mr. Henderson, he said, voice low, deliberate. The estate was closed 3 years ago. The funds were exhausted on debts and living expenses. Claire, sharp and quick, cut in immediately. We dispute that. Margaret has a new house, a new car, she takes trips. That's Lucas's money. She smiled thinly at me, hand over Lucas's arm. I watched her nails dig in slightly as she tried to anchor him to her side, and I felt a flicker of something anger. Yes, but mostly clarity. I could see the fear she was trying to mask. I work. Claire. I said, calm but firm, letting the words fall like stones on water. I have a job, a career. That's where the money comes from. I kept my tone even, letting the simplicity of the truth sink in. Henderson barked, almost theatrically. Don't speak to my client directly. I leaned forward slightly. I'll speak to my brother. My voice softened, almost a whisper, but it carried. Lucas. Look at me. Lucas flinched, but kept his eyes down. I repeated, softer this time. Do you really believe I stole from you after everything? You controlled everything. The words hung in the air. He hesitated, eyes flicking toward me, his face pale. And then Ralph struck, slowly, deliberately. He pulled a thick black binder from his briefcase, placing it in front of Lucas without sliding it. It was like a gauntlet thrown silently. This, Ralph said, voice low and dangerous, contains a forensic audit of every penny Margaret spent as executor and trustee. Funeral costs, mortgage payoffs, $47,000 in direct transfers to Lucas for his business ventures. Each transfer accounted for, Claire scoffed, $47,000. Where's the rest? Her voice was sharp, incredulous, designed to dominate. She looked at Lucas, expecting him to jump in, to defend her argument. But he didn't. He sat, frozen, tense, unable to reconcile what he saw with the narrative he had been sold. Ralph opened a stapled packet within the binder. "This is the business capital audit," he said, sliding it across the table. It landed in front of Lucas like a challenge. He picked it up, flipping through pages quickly, eyes wide. I answered for him when he stammered. The $2,500 requested for web hosting and domain acquisition, charged instead on a debit card linked to Sapphire Spa and Resort. Scottsdale, couples package, champagne service. Claire's hand tightened on Lucas's arm. I could see the color drain from his face. The veneer of control she had tried to maintain faltered, the panic starting to show. Ralph didn't pause. He leaned forward and delivered the coup de grace. And here, the loan agreement, signed 4 years ago. Funds after the first 12 months are loans contingent on business use. Personal use triggers immediate repayment. Lucas's head snapped up, terror in his eyes. I never signed that, he stammered. His voice quavered, disbelief etched across his face. "You did," I said, calm, letting the truth land. "You were eating a bagel, rushing to meet a potential investor. You signed. Terms were clear." Claire jumped to her feet, chair scraping violently, screaming. "This is a trick you forged," this Ralph's voice cut through her rage. Steady as a tomb, notarized by the bank manager down the street. "We have the log." "This is legitimate." Claire turned to Lucas, fury twisting her expression. He looked from me to her, terror and realization flooding his face. I forgot. I didn't read it," he whispered, voice cracking. Henderson, realizing the tide had turned, tried to interject, but Ralph was merciless. "Sit down, counsel. Stories are for bedtime. Courts are for evidence." He gestured to the binder, then to the contracts and records, each document, each receipt, each photo, perfectly lined up to tell the truth. The room felt like it held its breath. Claire's entitlement, her panic, the web of lies unraveling before her eyes. Lucas sat frozen, the weight of the reality pressing down. The calm, measured delivery of truth, backed by cold, undeniable evidence, contrasted sharply with their flailing, panicked attempts to control the narrative. And I sat there, heart steady, hands folded, letting the story we had built together unfold naturally, knowing that each moment was tipping the scales in our favor. By the time the mediation ended, the atmosphere had shifted completely. Claire stormed out, fury and disbelief mixed in every step, leaving Lucas alone to face the collapse of the narrative he had believed. Ralph closed the binder with a satisfying thud, a small, dry chuckle escaping him, and I realized, in that moment, that calm and preparation, methodical and measured, had defeated panic and entitlement. The story that had been twisted against me was now being laid bare, piece by piece, and the room itself seemed to breathe a sigh of relief as clarity replaced the tension. After the mediation, I thought the hardest part was over. I thought the evidence, the contracts, the forensic audit would be enough to put this behind me. But 2 days later, Ralph called. They were doubling down. New claims had appeared, alleging duress, that I had manipulated Lucas while he was grieving. Duress, I laughed bitterly at the idea. 4 years after our parents' death, they were trying to paint me as some controlling monster. And worse, my firm got wind of it. A journalist called, sniffing around for a story about a partner defrauding a family trust. Suddenly, my career was at risk too. The betrayal wasn't just personal anymore, it was professional. I knew panic wouldn't help. I hung up and went back to my office, staring at my monitors, my hands curled around the edges of the desk. That's when I realized I needed absolute clarity, irrefutable evidence, not just the spreadsheets and bank statements, but proof of intent. Something that would show that Lucas wasn't a victim, that he had knowingly colluded, that the duress claim was a fabrication. I spent the next 2 nights going through everything I had. Every voicemail I'd saved, every message, every snippet of conversation, hours of audio, dozens of recordings, each one a tiny thread in the tapestry of truth. It was exhausting, painstaking work, but I couldn't afford to miss a single detail. Then, in the quiet darkness of my office, I found it. Not in a voicemail, not in a text, but in a video, a recording from a family Christmas party 3 years ago. One of the few times Lucas had been over without asking for money immediately. I had left the camera running on the mantelpiece, testing a new setup. I hadn't intended to capture anything important, just holiday chaos, laughter, opening gifts. But as I scrubbed through the footage, there it was. Lucas, at the 45-minute mark, still in the kitchen, phone in hand. He laughed into it, voice casual, almost smug. Yeah, I signed whatever she wanted last week. Who cares, it's just paper. She's desperate to keep me happy. She feels guilty about mom and dad. I can get whatever I want out of her. Yeah, I'll get the money for the deposit. Don't worry. She thinks it's for a marketing retainer. She's clueless. I froze, heart hammering, staring at the pixelated image of my brother laughing at my grief, at my overcompensation, at everything I had given him freely, weaponized against me. This was a confession. This was proof of intent. I backed up the video immediately, copied it to a thumb drive, to the cloud, everywhere. I needed to be ready. And I needed it to be untouchable. The court date was set for the following week, an expedited hearing for the dismissal motion. I called Ralph, voice steady, adrenaline keeping me focused. I have something for the judge, I said. He knew immediately what I meant. Is it a document, he asked. No, I said softly. It's a freeze frame. It's a confession. Every step forward from there was about precision. I couldn't afford drama or anger or panic. I had to let the facts, the evidence, and the video do the talking. My focus narrowed. I prepped my notes, highlighted timestamps, annotated connections between past transfers, the loan agreement, and the content of the video. Ralph and I reviewed it together, walking through every potential objection, every argument the opposing counsel could make about admissibility, credibility, and relevance. By the end of the weekend, we had a clear, airtight strategy. I slept little, but it didn't feel like suffering. It felt like sharpening a tool. Every glance at the video, every replay, reinforced the story. Lucas was not a victim of grief or manipulation. He was an active participant, knowingly complicit, fully aware of what he was doing. Claire had orchestrated much of it, but he was willingly part of the plan. The evidence wasn't just numbers or contracts, it was him, on camera, admitting that exactly what he was doing. While I had been giving him trust, care, and support. As the week progressed, the tension built. At work, I had to navigate colleagues' questions, the occasional worried glance from my boss, but I didn't let it shake me. At home, the office became a war room, folders stacked, screens filled with spreadsheets, and the video ready to present. Each time I watched it, I reminded myself of the stakes. This wasn't just about $47,000 anymore. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. About stopping the manipulation. About ending a 5-year cycle of exploitation. I rehearsed my calm delivery, imagining the courtroom, imagining the mediator, imagining Lucas and Claire sitting there, thinking they could pull the same tricks they had in the past. But this time, I was prepared. This time, the table was set differently. The contracts were in order, the accounts were audited, the transfers matched the requests, the video documented intent, every detail aligned to tell a clear story that could not be disputed. My preparation was exhaustive, methodical, precise. When I finally leaned back in my chair late at night, staring at the glowing screen, I felt a strange sense of calm. The panic, the betrayal, the heartbreak, they were still there, yes, but they'd been harnessed, transformed into focus, strategy, and purpose. I wasn't acting on emotion anymore. I was letting logic, evidence, and truth lead the way. Ralph's voice on the phone reminded me one last time. Bring the video, bring the folders, and stay calm. Let the evidence speak. By the time Friday arrived, I felt ready. I wasn't nervous in the usual sense. I was alert, tuned in, prepared for anything. The past voicemails, the financial documents, the contract, the Christmas video, all of it formed a chain impossible to break. I knew that the opposing counsel would try every tactic, every ploy, every angle to cast doubt. But the clarity of the evidence was absolute. Lucas wasn't manipulated. He was complicit, and Claire's influence, the driving force behind much of the misdirection, had been exposed through the timeline and the expenditures. I took a deep breath as I walked into the courthouse that morning. The fluorescent lights, the sterile air, the faint scent of floor wax. It all felt familiar now, less intimidating. I'd walked through the chaos of 5 years, through migraines, betrayal, manipulation, and grief. Now it was just a matter of presenting the truth in all its meticulous, undeniable detail. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of quiet satisfaction, knowing that justice wasn't just a hope, it was prepared, carefully laid out, and ready to be revealed. The stage was set. All that remained was to let it unfold. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, windowless, fluorescent lit, smelling faintly of floor wax and anxiety. It wasn't cinematic, wasn't grand, it was sterile, harsh, and designed to dismantle people. I sat next to Ralph, hands clasped tightly in my lap, knuckles white, trying to calm my racing thoughts. Across the aisle, Lucas slouched, looking smaller than I had ever seen him, his ill-fitting suit even more disheveled in the harsh light. Claire, on the other hand, was electric, hair perfect, makeup flawless, whispering feverishly into the ear of her new attorney, who nodded and jotted down notes like he was decoding some intricate plot. The bailiff called for all to rise, and Judge Keller entered. A woman in her 60s, steel gray hair in a bun, eyes sharp, the kind that had seen every variation of greed imaginable. She took her seat, adjusting her glasses, reading from the docket in a bored, measured voice. Redacted versus redacted. Motion to dismiss and counterclaim for debt recovery. She glanced at the attorneys briefly, assessing, judging, blanded. Claire's lawyer stood, shiny suit, plastic hair, and voice rehearsed. Your Honor, we intend to show that the so-called contract presented by the defense is void. It was signed under extreme duress, Lucas was grieving, manipulated by a controlling older sister who held his inheritance hostage. Heat rose in my cheeks at the word hostage. I had held him, protected him, loved him when no one else could. Now, they painted me as a predator, but I forced myself to breathe, to let the calm take over. I didn't argue. Not yet. I let Ralph respond. Slow, deliberate, measured. Your Honor, we have heard a very touching story, but courts are for evidence, not bedtime stories. He lifted the thick black folder and placed it gently on the defense table. It wasn't the same one from mediation. It was bigger, heavier. Every paper, every note, every receipt meticulously organized. He handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Inside it, Your Honor, you will find a transcript, and attached is a USB drive containing video evidence. Date December 24th, 3 years ago. The video captures a family Christmas gathering, and the defendant's son, Mr. Lucas, speaking candidly about his intent regarding the financial support received from the estate. I could see the judge's eyes narrow as she scanned the materials. Lucas shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Claire, who looked like she was about to combust. Ralph gave me a slight nod. It was time. The monitor flickered to life. The image was clear, my kitchen, warm, bright with Christmas lights. The faint background of Bing Crosby singing. Lucas appeared, healthy, laughing. Phone in hand, the words were casual, almost smug. Yeah. I'm at the ATM. I mean, Margie's house? Yeah. I signed whatever she wanted last week. Who cares? It's just paper. She's desperate to keep me happy. She feels guilty about Mom and Dad. I can get whatever I want out of her. Yeah. I'll get the money for the deposit. Don't worry. She thinks it's for a marketing retainer. She's clueless. The room fell silent. Even the judge leaned forward, finger tracing the transcript slowly, taking in every word. I watched Lucas sink in his chair, covering his face with his hands. Not the manipulative, calculating mask he used for money, but pure, unguarded panic. Claire's composure cracked. Her hand trembled over his, her eyes wide, voice shaking with disbelief and rage. You told me it was airtight. You said she had no proof, she shouted. Lucas reached for her hand, trying to calm her, but she slapped it away. His shoulders slumped, the weight of reality pressing down. The evidence was inescapable. Every lie, every manipulation, every scheme to turn my generosity into a weapon was laid bare. The judge didn't flinch. She didn't scold. She didn't lecture. She looked at Lucas with profound disappointment, the kind that pierces deeper than anger. You really thought this would work? She asked, voice quiet but heavy with meaning. You really thought you could come in here claiming duress, emotional distress? While we have video of you mocking your sister's grief and premeditating the fraud, Blandon tried to interject. Voice rising. Your Honor, if I may, sit down. Counsel, the judge snapped, like a whip cracking across the room. Unless you wish to be sanctioned, you will remain silent. She turned back to Lucas. Mr. Redacted, you are not a victim. You are a con artist, not a very good one. And then the explosion. Claire, she leapt from her seat, screaming, pointing, her fury unmatched. Do you know what this means? Do you know how much debt I have? I needed this payout. I needed this to clear loans. She pivoted, eyes blazing, looking at anyone who would listen. The bailiff moved toward her, commanding order, but she barely noticed. The sound of the doors slamming behind her as she stormed out echoed like gunfire. Lucas was left behind, alone, silent. Blandon was frantically shuffling papers, retreating, trying to extricate himself from the chaos. Lucas finally lowered his hands, peering through fingers at the table, at the empty space where Claire had been. The reality hit him. No more manipulation, no more scapegoating, just truth, backed by undeniable evidence. The silence that settled over the room was heavy, suffocating, yet cleansing. It was the sound of lies unraveling, of narratives collapsing, of clarity finally prevailing. Judge Keller cleared her throat, calm and deliberate. "I have seen enough. The plaintiff's case is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, on the counterclaim, judgment is entered for the defendant. Repayment of $47,450 plus statutory interest and legal fees will be garnished from future wages." Her words were precise, deliberate, and final. The gavels echoed with authority. Closing the chapter, I stood, legs weak, heart racing, but inside there was a lightness I hadn't felt in years. I looked at Lucas. The tears weren't theatrical, they were raw. Silent sobs of someone who had been exposed and stripped of their pretense. I didn't move toward him. That part of our lives, the enabling, the constant support, was over. I had defended myself. I had exposed the truth. And for the first time in years, the balance between my heart and my responsibilities felt right. Ralph gave me a small nod, a smile that acknowledged the victory without gloating. I turned to him. "Lunch?" I asked, voice hoarse but steady. "I'm buying." The drive out of the courthouse was quiet. No fanfare, no applause, just the steady, comforting hum of reality settling into its proper place. Over the next 48 hours, the fallout was swift. With no lawsuit payout on the horizon, Lucas's carefully maintained lifestyle collapsed. Claire blocked his number, skipped town, moving states away. He was evicted, forced to confront the real world without my financial crutch. 2 months later, I was pruning hydrangeas in the garden on a crisp Saturday morning. The migraine that had haunted me for months was gone. Sleep returned, and with it, a semblance of normalcy. And then, slowly, Lucas appeared at the driveway, tired, older, a man grown into his mistakes. He placed an envelope on the wall of $500 money order. The first payment on the judgment. He had gotten a job, hard work, honest labor, and for the first time, he was taking responsibility. Our conversation was tentative, fragile. Apologies were exchanged, honest and raw. He acknowledged his mistakes, the lies, the manipulation, and the role he had played in his own downfall. We weren't fully healed, but we were on solid ground. That moment, the acknowledgement, the accountability was the victory, not just in court, but in reclaiming my life, in reclaiming my boundaries, in seeing him confront truth and start anew. The courtroom battle was over. The truth laid bare, and after 5 years of betrayal and heartbreak, I finally felt free. In the end, it wasn't just about money or winning a case. Lucas apologized, genuinely, and I finally reclaimed my life, my space, my peace. We're not exactly the same siblings we were. The scars of betrayal are still there, but for the first time, there's hope for a real connection again. Sometimes, healing takes time, and accountability is the first step. If you found this story as intense and revealing as I did sharing it, consider subscribing for more stories that make you think, and maybe even feel a little